History of the genre. One of the earliest examples of a psychological thriller film would be Alfred Hitchcock's The Lodger, which was released in 1926. This saw Hitchcock's first thriller, his third film, and started what became a career that saw him known for his psychological thriller works. Two further examples of Hitchcock's work in the 1930s are The 39 Steps and The Lady Vanishes. He dominated the thriller genre during this era. One of the first notable psychological thrillers came in 1944 with George Cukor's film Gaslight. In this film, the male character attempts to send his wife insane in the hope of finding her late aunt's rubies that he believes have been left behind in their house. The 50s saw Hitchcock add Technicolor to his films, and the creation of the psychological thriller Vertigo. Other thriller films of this decade include Kiss Me Deadly and Touch of Evil. Hitchcock again made headlines in 1960 because of his film Psycho, one of the most noted psychological thrillers of all time. J. Lee Thompson directed Cape Fear in 1962, and Roman Polanski's first English-language film, Repulsion, was released in 1965. The start of the 1970s saw more violence occurring in thriller films. Hitchcock's Frenzy was given an R rating. It also saw the further development of the psychological aspects of the thriller, as in the film Don't Look Now, where a couple grieving the loss of their daughter keep believing they are seeing her. Conspiracy thrillers seemed to become more popular in the 1980s, with films such as Defense of the Realm and The Osterman Weekend. In 1989, the creation of the psychological thriller Dead Calm saw the character played by Nicole Kidman fighting for her life. Psychological thrillers definitely took off during the 1990s, and this trend has continued until the present day. Films such as Misery, Sleeping with the Enemy and The Talented Mr. Ripley made this genre increasingly popular, up to the creation of Silence of the Lambs, a classic psychological thriller film. More recent examples of this genre of film would be Black Swan, as directed by Darren Aronofsky, and Shutter Island, which was directed by Martin Scorsese.
Iconic directors. Alfred Hitchcock. Psychological thrillers include Rebecca, Vertigo, Psycho and Spellbound. Hitchcock has a very distinctive style. He developed the use of point-of-view shots that represent a character's gaze, which allows the audience to feel as though they too are involved in uncovering the story. This puts them on a similar level as the characters, as they feel all the suspense as though it were real. Hitchcock also placed great importance on portraying the emotions of the characters using the theory of proximity. This involved using a wide shot and then a sudden cut to a close-up, this contrast adding drama, emotion and shock. Unusually for the genre, he uses humour and places the characters in ironic situations which can help to increase the tension. Once the suspense has been built, he then typically ends it in the least expected way, being one of the first directors to use dramatic plot twists at the end and to go against Todorow's theory of equilibrium. Darren Aronofsky. Psychological thrillers include Pi, Requiem for a Dream and Black Swan. He takes a more dark approach to the psychological thriller, with many including a strong theme of paranoia. Characters involved in his films usually have characteristics which are clearly inhuman, and the plot typically involves the audience watching their lives slowly break down around them. Aronofsky uses a lot of close-up shaky shots from various angles to portray the distress and panic that the characters are experiencing. His films are intently focused on one character, and the narrative is shown through their eyes. This character is usually isolated and alone, and often has an obsession with something dangerous. This obsession is never overcome, and his films often end with the character in a similar place to when it started, giving his films a depressing tone. Christopher Nolan. Psychological thrillers include The Dark Knight, Memento, Insomnia and Inception. His films focus more on the thriller side of the genre. He provides a form of escapism for his audience, with his films often involving exciting, high-speed action and characters with superhuman traits. The protagonists of the film are introduced as being haunted by memories of some kind of tragic event, which then defines the aims of the narrative. Their aims could be anything from seeking revenge on a murderer, saving a city or catching a killer. The memory is usually the drive for the character and is unveiled through flashbacks throughout the film. Nolan's films are generally slightly more upbeat than other psychological thrillers. In the majority, there is some sense of justice and resolution at the end for the protagonist.
Research into age certificates. The most common age certificates for psychological thriller films tends to be over 15 or 18. A 15-rated film means that nobody younger than that may go and view the product within a cinema, purchase it or rent it. A film becomes defined as 15 when it contains offensive language but doesn't overly endorse the use of it. It may also use drugs, although it shouldn't encourage the use of them. The misuse of easily accessible and dangerous substances is usually likely to not be allowed, as they can inspire younger audiences. Equally dangerous behaviour may be shown, but not in detail, and weapons must not be glamorised. Things such as strong threat and horror or gore are usually allowed, but not if they are sexualised or sadistic. Nudity within sexual content is allowed as long as it's not a large concentration on detail, although it may be good to note that in an educational film there's no restraint on nudity. Sex may be referenced but not shown, and strong sexual talk is usually allowed if it is vital to the content of the film. Finally, violence is also acceptable as long as no concentration is shown on the inflicted pain, and it's again not sadistic or sexualised. And then if a film is rated 18, nobody under that age may legally view the film in a cinema, rent the film or purchase it. But in line with the Human Rights Act of 1998, the 18 rating guideline concerns do not usually override the principal fact that adults should be free to choose their own entertainment. The usual exceptions are material which is breaching the criminal law or being created through commission of a criminal offence, or material which appears to risk harm to individuals or society. For example, scenes of sexual violence which might eroticise sexual assault may be banned from public viewing. Expectations of promotional material. The expectations of promotional material for psychological thrillers is similar to that of horrors, thrillers, and action films. A trailer, for instance, should always include some backstory, which is often narrated by a main character. This technique is shown in the film Fight Club, for instance. As the film itself does, the trailer will usually be expected to follow Todorov's theory of disequilibrium, where they will begin by showing an equilibrium and then develop into a disequilibrium, but unlike the film itself, not show the new equilibrium at the end, and usually instead tend to cut to shots of the title of the film or a coming soon text of some form to leave the potential audience in suspense. Many people say that they expect a psychological thriller to be a thriller or horror which focuses on mental ability and disability rather than physical, so presumably they would expect to see some indication of this within the trailer. Dark lighting and lack of establishing shots are also essential to a psychological thriller, adding the suspense and confusion which many obtain. Not many characters tend to be focused on within trailers, usually just the main protagonist and antagonist, allowing you to feel like you have begun to get to know them as people. Within other promotional materials such as posters and magazine covers, people usually expect similar elements as they do with trailers. For instance, dark lighting is still a must, as is focusing on only one or two of the characters. Often, the title of the film takes a central role to the image, becoming the most important thing which sticks into a potential viewer's memory. Settings aren't often focused on, and instead the actions of the people are more central, so usually a sinister or seemingly harmless object will also be central to the image, giving another sense of confusion and knowing that something isn't right. Whilst these are the few main identifications of the genre within promotional material, there are obviously bound to be many more variables. As a hybrid, the genre allows itself to take anything it wants to from the genres it has been created out of, and throw out any it doesn't want, leaving a much larger space for personal interpretation.